Gunshots rip through a hospital emergency room, and a kind black nurse collapses after shielding a child with her own body. As doctors fight to save her life, a terrifying truth surfaces. She is secretly married to Korea's most feared Mafia boss. What follows is a night of love, sacrifice, and impossible choices, where power bows to compassion and violence meets mercy. This gripping story proves that sometimes, the strongest love doesn't fight to stay. It fights to let go. Hey family, welcome to my story channel. Please subscribe and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for the support. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. The gunshot tore through the emergency room without warning, sharp and loud, cracking the air like glass breaking, and for a split second everything froze before panic exploded everywhere at once. Patients screamed and ducked. A metal tray crashed to the floor. A monitor began to scream its warning beep as a masked man raised his gun again, his hands shaking, his breath uneven. "Everybody get down!" A security guard yelled, but fear had already swallowed the room. Amina Cole stood at the edge of bed 7, her hands still on a small boy's shoulders as he trembled uncontrollably. "It's okay," she told him, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "Don't move. Look at me." The boy's lips shook. "I'm scared," he whispered. Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, and Amina reacted without thinking. She stepped forward, turning her body so the child was behind her. "Hey!" she shouted at the gunman. "Look at me." The masked man hesitated, his eyes wide, his finger tight on the trigger. The third shot fired. Amina felt the impact before she heard it, a sharp, burning force slamming into her side, knocking the breath from her lungs. She gasped, staggered, and fell hard to the floor as blood spread quickly across her scrubs. "Amina!" someone screamed. Nurses rushed toward her as the gunman backed away in shock, repeating, "I didn't mean to, I didn't," before security tackled him to the ground. "She's been shot," a doctor yelled. "Get a gurney now." Hands pressed against Amina's wound as she fought to stay conscious. "Stay with me," a voice urged urgently. "Don't close your eyes." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. As they rushed her toward the operating room, alarms blared throughout the hospital, and outside, black SUVs screeched into the parking lot, their engines roaring like a warning of something far worse about to arrive. The emergency room doors burst open just as surgeons pulled Amina through the operating room doors, and the hospital seemed to fall silent again, but this time it was not fear, it was presence. A tall man in a black suit walked in calmly, his steps unhurried, his eyes scanning the chaos like it was nothing new to him. Doctors blocked his path instinctively. "Sir, you can't be here," one said, trying to sound firm while his hands shook. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply looked past them toward the operating room and said quietly, "That's my wife." The words landed like another gunshot. Your wife?" the doctor repeated, confused. "Sir, the patient is Nurse Amina Cole." The man nodded once. "I know." Police rushed in behind him, radios buzzing, but stopped short when several men in dark suits stepped forward, their faces hard, their hands calmly folded in front of them. "Who are you?" an officer demanded. The man finally turned his gaze on them. "Someone you don't want panicking right now," he replied. Inside the operating room, a surgeon shouted, "Her blood pressure is dropping." And the man's jaw tightened as his fists clenched slowly at his sides. "Save her," he said to no one in particular, his voice low but dangerous. A nurse whispered to another, "That's Kong Jun-suk, from the news." Fear rippled through the room as understanding dawned. The hospital had not just survived an attack, it had become the center of a storm that could tear cities apart. If this opening has already pulled you in, hit like right now, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about Amina Cole, and the man who just claimed her as his wife. The hallway outside the operating room filled with whispers the moment the doors closed behind the surgeons, voices low but frantic, fear slipping through every sentence as doctors, nurses, and police tried to understand what had just happened. "Her husband," one nurse murmured, pressing her back against the wall. "Amina never talked about a husband." Another shook her head slowly. She barely talked about anything personal. A senior doctor adjusted his glasses, staring at the man in the black suit who stood a few steps away from the operating room doors, silent now, unmoving, like a statue carved from steel. The doctor swallowed. "I've seen him before," he whispered to a colleague. "International news. Crime briefings. That's Kong Jun-suk." The name moved through the hallway like cold air. "The Korean Mafia boss," someone breathed. A young nurse clutched her chest. "That's impossible. Amina is just Amina." At that moment, a police officer stepped forward, trying to take control. "Sir, we're going to need you to step away," he said firmly. Kong finally turned to him, his eyes calm but heavy. "You're going to need her to live," Kong replied. "So let them work." The officer hesitated, then stepped back as if his instincts warned him not to push further. Inside the operating room, voices rose. "We're losing blood fast. Clamp there now." The sound of machines filled the space, and Kang's jaw tightened with every sharp beep. He pulled out his phone and spoke quietly. "Lock the building down," he said. "No one in, no one out. Not media. Not rivals." A pause. "Yes. Now." When he ended the call, the hallway felt smaller, heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. This was no longer just a hospital emergency. It was something much bigger, and everyone there could feel it tightening around them. As the night dragged on, fragments of Amina's life began to surface in broken conversations, pieces that never made sense before now slowly fitting together. "She always took extra shifts," one nurse said softly. "I thought she just needed the money." "She never gave an emergency contact," another added. "Just wrote none every time." A doctor frowned. "No photos in her locker. No ring. Nothing." Kong listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the red surgery light above the door. In his mind, memories clashed painfully with the present. Amina standing in their quiet apartment, tying her hair back before work, smiling gently as she said, "People don't need to know everything about us." He had agreed. He had promised. A police officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said carefully, "if what they're saying is true, you're a wanted man." Kong looked at him. "Tonight," he said evenly, "I am a husband waiting for his wife to survive surgery." The officer said nothing. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse whispered a prayer. Another wiped her eyes. "She didn't deserve this," someone said. Kang's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "They've caught the shooter," the voice on the other end reported. "He says he was sent." Kong closed his eyes briefly, pain flickering across his face before disappearing behind control. "By who?" he asked. "He says it was a message." Kong exhaled slowly. "A message to me," he finished. He looked back at the operating room doors, his voice dropping. She was never supposed to be part of this. The memory came to Kong Jun-suk without warning, rising quietly in his mind as he stood outside the operating room, and for a moment the noise of the hospital faded as the past pulled him under. Years earlier, the place had been nothing like this hospital. No bright lights, no machines screaming for attention. Just a small medical outreach clinic tucked into a forgotten corner of the city, running on borrowed power and hope. Amina had been there late that night, wiping down a metal table when the door creaked open and a man staggered inside, his hand pressed tightly to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're bleeding," she said immediately, moving toward him without fear or hesitation. "Sit down." Kong watched her with surprise as he lowered himself onto the chair, expecting questions, suspicion, maybe even panic, but none of it came. "Does it hurt?" she asked calmly as she peeled his hand away to examine the wound. "Yes," he admitted. "Then you're alive," she replied simply. He studied her face while she worked, noticing how steady her hands were, how focused her eyes remained even as she cleaned the wound. "You're not scared of me," he said quietly. Amina didn't look up. "I've seen worse than men who bleed," she replied. When she finished, she wrapped the bandage tight and stepped back. "You'll live," she said. "Try not to get shot again." For the first time in a long while, Kong smiled. He returned to the clinic days later, then weeks later, sometimes injured, sometimes not, always finding a reason to sit across from her and talk in the quiet moments between patients. They spoke about small things at first: music, long nights, the way the world seemed louder when you were tired. One evening he finally asked, "Why don't you ask me who I am?" Amina paused, then shrugged. "Why don't you ask me?" she answered. He laughed softly. Over time, the truth hovered between them like an unspoken agreement. She knew his world was dangerous. He knew hers was fragile. One night, after closing up the clinic, he said, "Being close to me is not safe." Amina met his gaze. "Loving anyone is not safe," she replied. "But I choose what I'm afraid of." When he asked her to marry him, it wasn't dramatic. No grand promise. Just honesty. "I can't leave my world yet," he said. "And I won't bring you into it." She nodded. "Then we protect each other from a distance," she said. They married quietly, with only a witness who never spoke their names again. She kept her life simple. He kept her life hidden. Back in the present, Kong opened his eyes as the memory faded, the sound of hospital machines rushing back into focus, sharp and relentless. The surgery light still burned red. Time dragged painfully. A doctor stepped out briefly, his face tight. "We're still operating," he said. Kong nodded once, unable to speak. His phone buzzed again. "The shooter is talking," his man reported. "He says they watched her. Learned her routine." Kang's chest tightened. He remembered Amina's voice, calm as always. "People don't need to know everything about us." He had believed secrecy would protect her. Now it had made her a target. Kong leaned against the wall, his voice low and controlled. "No one touches him," he ordered. "I want names. I want proof." He ended the call and stared at the operating room doors, guilt pressing heavy on his chest. "I should have pulled away sooner," he whispered. "I should have let you go." Somewhere inside, a machine beeped faster. Kong straightened slowly, his eyes hardening. Love had brought him here. Now love would decide what kind of man he would be next. The small security room near the hospital's underground parking lot smelled of sweat and fear, the air thick as the captured gunman sat hunched in a chair, his wrists bound, his mask torn away to reveal a young face twisted with panic. He shook uncontrollably, eyes darting from the police officers to the men in dark suits who stood silently against the wall, their presence far more frightening than handcuffs. "I swear I didn't mean to hit her," he cried, his voice cracking as tears ran down his cheeks. "She stepped in front of the kid. I was aiming low. I was just supposed to scare people." One of Kang's men leaned forward. "Who sent you?" he asked calmly. The gunman swallowed hard. "I don't know their names," he said quickly. "They contacted me through intermediaries. Said it was business. Said the real target wasn't the hospital." Kong stepped into the room then, and the temperature seemed to drop instantly. The gunman looked up, recognition flashing across his face, and his fear doubled. "Please," he begged. "I didn't know she was your wife." Kong said nothing at first. He simply stared at the man, his eyes unreadable. "You knew exactly who she was," Kong finally said. "A way to reach me." The gunman nodded frantically. "They said if you felt pain, you'd make mistakes. They said hurting her would break you." Kang's jaw tightened, the words cutting deeper than the bullet ever could. "Break you." He turned away slowly, his hands clenched behind his back as the truth settled in. This was not random. This was strategy. And Amina had paid the price. Back upstairs, the hospital hummed with nervous energy as word spread quietly among staff that the attack had been planned, not impulsive. A nurse wiped her eyes. "They used her," she whispered. "She didn't even know." Police radios buzzed with urgent chatter, and outside, flashing lights painted the hospital walls in red and blue. Inside the operating room, the surgeons worked tirelessly, sweat dripping as tension climbed. "Her blood pressure is unstable," one warned. "We're losing time." When the update reached Kong, his chest tightened painfully, but his voice remained steady. "Do whatever it takes," he told the doctor. "Money is not a concern." The doctor hesitated. "This isn't about money," he said quietly. Kong nodded. "I know." His phone rang again. "We have confirmation," his man said. A rival syndicate. They've been watching her for months. Learning her routine. Waiting. Kong closed his eyes briefly, anger burning beneath his control. Call off every unnecessary move, he ordered. No retaliation yet. The man on the line hesitated. Are you sure? Kong opened his eyes. If we move too fast, more innocent people bleed. He ended the call and stood still, listening to the distant sound of hospital machines fighting for Amina's life. For the first time, fear crept into his thoughts. Not fear of enemies, but fear of what his world had done to hers. If you're still listening, subscribe now, because from this moment forward, every decision Kong makes will either save Amina or start a war that cannot be undone. The rooftop was quiet compared to the chaos below, the night air heavy as Kong stepped out alone, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath him while his phone buzzed non-stop in his hand. He ignored it at first, resting both palms on the railing as memories pressed into him without mercy. Amina standing in their kitchen tying her hair before work, Amina laughing softly when he complained about silence, Amina looking him in the eye and saying, "Promise me you won't let your darkness touch innocent people." His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Say it," Kong said. The voice on the other end was tense. "We're ready. One word, and we wipe them out. Every last one." Kong closed his eyes. Revenge would be easy. Violence was familiar. It would quiet the pain for a moment, but he knew what would follow: retaliation, blood, more nights like this. "If I don't move," the voice continued, "they'll think you're weak." Kong opened his eyes slowly, his gaze returning to the glowing hospital windows below. "They already know what I am," he replied. "Tonight, they'll learn who I choose to be." The voice hesitated. "You're really doing this?" Kong exhaled. "Stand down," he ordered. Silence followed. Then, reluctantly, understood. Kong ended the call and let the phone fall to his side. For the first time in years, choosing peace felt heavier than choosing war, but it was the only choice that kept her world safe. Inside, alarms echoed faintly through the glass, pulling him back to the reality he could not escape. Down in the ICU waiting area, tension clung to every breath as doctors moved in and out, their faces unreadable, their words cautious. A nurse approached Kong carefully. "She's still fighting," she said quietly. Kong nodded, gratitude and fear twisting together in his chest. "She always does," he replied. When the nurse walked away, Kong sat down and slowly removed the wedding ring from his finger, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger as memories flooded back. The quiet ceremony, her soft smile, the way she said, "We'll love each other without owning each other." He placed the ring gently on the table in front of him, as if setting down a piece of himself. His phone buzzed again. "We can expose them," his man said. "Names. Accounts. Evidence. It will destroy them legally. Quietly." Kong looked toward the ICU doors. "Do it," he said. "Every file. Every connection." A pause. "And what about you?" the voice asked. Kong stood slowly. "I disappear," he replied. Inside the operating room, a surgeon shouted, "We've got a pulse. Hold steady." Kong closed his eyes, his jaw tightening as emotion finally cracked through his control. "If loving me is the danger," he whispered to himself, "then I'll be the one who leaves." Time stretched painfully inside the hospital, turning minutes into something heavier as the operating room doors remained closed and the red surgery light burned on without mercy. Kong sat rigid in the waiting area, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly as voices drifted in and out. Footsteps rushing, nurses calling for supplies, machines beeping in relentless rhythm. Every sound felt personal now. A doctor stepped out briefly, his mask pulled down, his eyes tired. "She's stable for the moment," he said carefully. Kong stood immediately. "For the moment is not enough," he replied. The doctor nodded. "We're doing everything we can." Kong bowed his head slightly, a silent thank you, then sat again, forcing himself to breathe. His phone buzzed repeatedly, messages flooding in from across the world. News anchors spoke in urgent tones as screens lit up in offices and homes far away, major criminal networks under investigation. Financial accounts frozen. International warrants issued. Kong listened through an earpiece as his empire collapsed piece by piece. not with explosions or gunfire, but with documents, recordings, and signatures. "They're panicking," his man reported. "They didn't expect this." Kang's voice was calm but hollow. "They underestimated her," he said. In the operating room, a surgeon shouted, "We're losing pressure, adjust now." Kong flinched, his fingers digging into his palms. He had faced death countless times, but never like this, never powerless, never waiting on the other side of a door with nothing but hope and regret to hold on to. The night pressed on, and for the first time, Kong Jun-suk understood how fragile control truly was. As dawn crept closer, exhaustion settled over the hospital like fog, but the work did not slow. "We're closing," a surgeon finally said hours later. "She's holding." The words hit Kong like a wave, knocking the air from his lungs as relief crashed into him so suddenly he had to steady himself against the wall. He closed his eyes, swallowing hard, then straightened as the reality of what came next settled in. Outside, news spread rapidly, headlines flashing, voices rising as reporters announced the sudden collapse of a feared Korean crime empire. Kong changed into a clean suit in a private room, moving mechanically as his men prepared his exit. "The plane is ready," one said. Kong nodded. "No delays," he replied. He walked one last time past the ICU doors, stopping just short, knowing he could not go inside without undoing everything he had chosen. He placed his hand against the glass briefly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Live," he said. "Live free." As the sun rose fully, Kong stepped into a waiting car, the hospital shrinking behind him as the city woke unaware of the choices made overnight. This was the longest night of his life, and its end did not bring victory, only distance, sacrifice, and a future neither of them had planned. If you're still here, subscribe now and stay with this story, because what will happen next answers the question everyone is holding their breath to ask. What happens when Amina finally wakes up? Amina drifted back to the surface of consciousness slowly, as if her body was reluctant to return to a world that had hurt her so badly, and the first thing she noticed was pain. Not sharp, but deep and heavy, sitting in her chest and side like a reminder she could not ignore. The steady beeping of a machine pulled her further awake, followed by low voices and the soft sound of footsteps moving carefully around her. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice, then opened fully. Bright light filled her vision, and she winced. "She's awake," a nurse said gently, stepping closer. Amina tried to move, but her body resisted, weak and slow. Her throat felt dry, and when she spoke, her voice came out barely louder than air. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in the ICU," the nurse replied softly. "You were in surgery for a long time." Memory returned suddenly and violently. The masked man, the gunshot, the burning pain, the child's terrified face. Amina's breathing became uneven. "The boy," she said quickly, fear flashing across her face. "Is he okay?" The nurse nodded. "He's safe. You protected him." Tears welled in Amina's eyes, slipping down her temples as relief washed through her. A doctor stepped into view. "You're very lucky," he said calmly. "Another inch, and it would have been different." Amina stared at the ceiling, absorbing his words, then slowly turned her head, noticing something that made her heart race. Security officers outside her door, the tension in the air, the careful way everyone seemed to watch her. "Why does this feel wrong?" she asked quietly. The nurse hesitated. "There's a lot you don't remember yet," she said. Amina swallowed hard, already knowing the answer to the question forming in her mind. "He was here," she said softly. It was not a question. Silence followed. Amina closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Before you tell me anything else," she said, "I need to know one thing." She took a shallow breath. "Did he choose peace?" The doctor met her eyes and nodded. "Yes," he said. Amina exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as tears flowed freely. "Good," she whispered. "Then he kept his promise." Just outside the ICU room, hidden from her view, Kong stood motionless, his back against the wall, his heart pounding as he listened to her voice for the first time since the shooting, alive and steady despite the pain. Hearing her ask that question, felt like a knife and a bomb all at once. She had always known him too well. A nurse stepped out quietly and froze when she saw him. "She's awake," the nurse said. She's asking for you. Kong shook his head slowly. No, he replied, his voice low. She's asking for the man she married. I can't be him anymore. He took a step back, forcing himself to let go before weakness pulled him inside that room. Inside, Amina stared at the door long after the nurse returned, her expression calm but knowing. She did not need anyone to explain his absence. She understood it better than anyone. A nurse adjusted her pillow gently. He made sure everything was handled, she said carefully. You're safe now. Amina nodded, her fingers brushing against the table beside her bed where something small caught her eye. Her breath hitched when she saw it, a familiar ring resting neatly on a folded piece of paper. There was no message, no explanation, just the ring. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, closing her fingers around it and pressing it to her chest as emotion surged through her. Love, pain, pride, and loss all tangled together. Down the corridor, Kong walked away without looking back, each step heavy but final, knowing that loving her had saved her life, even if it meant leaving it forever. Morning light filtered gently through the hospital window as Amina lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the steady rhythm of the monitor beside her reminding her that she was still here, still breathing, still alive. The room felt quieter now, but her heart was heavy with everything that had happened and everything that would never be said out loud. A nurse entered softly, checking her vitals, smiling with relief. You're doing well, she said. Amina nodded, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the ring resting against her chest. I know, she replied. Later that day, a doctor explained what had unfolded while she was unconscious. How powerful people had fallen, how the danger had disappeared almost as quickly as it had arrived. Amina listened without interruption. She didn't need details. She already understood the cost. When the doctor finished, she asked quietly, Is he gone? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Yes. He made sure no one followed him. Amina closed her eyes, letting the truth settle. She did not cry. She had already cried enough. She thought of the promise they had made, to love without destroying each other, and she knew he had kept it to the very end. Later, as nurses removed tubes and the room slowly returned to normal, Amina looked out the window at the city, alive and moving, unaware of the love that had been tested and released within its walls. You saved a life, a nurse told her softly. Amina answered honestly, he saved mine too. If this journey has stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, because stories like this deserve to be shared. Far away, at an airport filled with rushing footsteps and quiet announcements, Kong moved through the crowd unnoticed, his posture calm, his expression finally free of the weight he had carried for years. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He stopped walking and pulled it out. One message waited for him. I'm alive. Kang's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that held both joy and sorrow, and he closed his eyes briefly as if committing the moment to memory. He typed nothing back. Some answers didn't need words. As his flight was called, he slipped the phone away and walked forward, choosing distance not because he loved her less, but because he loved her enough. Somewhere behind him, an empire had collapsed. Somewhere ahead, a quieter life waited. And back at the hospital, Amina watched the sunlight climb higher, the ring resting safely beside her, no longer a symbol of loss, but proof that love could exist without possession. Their paths had separated, but what they shared had already done its work. It had saved a child, ended a cycle of violence, and given them both a chance to live differently. As the plane lifted into the sky and the hospital doors opened to a new day, the story ended not with reunion, but with peace. We've come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.